Welcome to SEPSA Talk. I am Evans Apia Kisi, the host of SEPSA Talk. SEPSA is Center for Better Society, Advocacy and Research Africa. SEPSA Africa is a non-profit organization that believes in a better society for all. We in SEPSA Africa believe that a better society begins with you and I. Hashtag, a better society begins with me. For more information, please log on to SEPSA Africa. Please log on to www.sepsaafrica.org. Please follow us on the following social media platforms: YouTube, SEPSA Talk; Facebook at SEPSA Africa; Instagram, SEPSA Africa; Twitter at SEPSA Africa. Like always, don't go away. We bring you another interesting discussion that is educative and informative on the topic transforming the agricultural sector in Africa. According to the World Bank, 59% of Africa's 1.216 billion people live in rural areas, and more than 80% earn their living in agriculture. Therefore, to develop and transform the rural area, agriculture remains the starting point and the main driving force. However, the agricultural sector is confronted with numerous challenges such as inadequate access to agricultural inputs, including irrigation, seeds, fertilizers, land, and the likes. In this episode of SEPSA Talk, we discuss measures to promote productivity growth in African agriculture that is the key to the transformation of the African rural economy. And to help us deal with this important issue are Mr. Yeboah Edmond. He is a research fellow at SEPSA Africa. He is currently a doctoral researcher at the University of Heidelberg, Germany. He holds MSc in Life Science from the Economics and Policy from the Technical University of Munich, Germany. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Sciences from the University of Cape Coast, Ghana. I must say that he's also a regular panelist, and it's always a pleasure to host him. Welcome once again to SEPSA Talk, Mr. Yeboah Edmond.
Thank you very much, Evans.
Thank you. And our next guest, who is obviously new to SEPSA Talk, goes by the name Mr. Kwabena Kra. He is currently a PhD candidate who specializes in agricultural and applied economics at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in the United States of America. He holds Masters in Agricultural and Applied Economics from Mississippi State University, USA. And he holds Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Sciences from University of Cape Coast, Ghana. Welcome to SEPSA Talk, Mr. Kwabena Kra.
Thank you for having me, Evans.
It's a pleasure
to be here.
Yeah. And we look forward to an interesting discussion. And our last guest, it's the second time we are hosting him, and it's a pleasure to do that, is Mr. Haruna Gado Yakubu. He's an animal nutritionist and feed safety engineer. He's also a research fellow at SEPSA Africa. He's also a research assistant at the Near Infrared Spectroscopy Laboratory, St. Istvan University, Kaposva Campus, Hungary. He's a PhD student in animal science at the Doctoral School of Animal Science, St. Istvan University, Kaposva Campus, Hungary. He holds MSc in Animal Nutrition and Feed Safety Engineering from the same university, and he holds BSc Agricultural Science from the University of Cape Coast, Ghana. His expertise lies in animal nutrition, feed safety, and rapid analytical technologies. Welcome once again to SEPSA Talk, Mr. Haruna Gado Yakubu.
Thank you, Evans, for having me.
Great. Great. Gentlemen, let me welcome you once again to CEPSA Talk. And I must say that once again, we are streaming live on Facebook at CEPSA Africa. And for those of you who follow AK Mensah, he's also sharing it on his wall. Before we start the discussion also, let me say that we would have one Moses Malaga. When the time is due, I would introduce him and tell you who he is, who bring in some practical perspective as far as agricultural technology is concerned. But without wasting much time, we'll begin with the discussion straight away. And I'd like to start with you, Mr. Yeboah Edmond. So the question is, I mean, as we saw in the background, it's obvious that agriculture is very important because it remains a driving force for rural transformation in the African continent. But we ask this rather provocative question: why do we need an agricultural transformation in Africa? Why do we need that when we should probably be talking about industrialization or, you know, improving the manufacturing sector? Why should we be talking about agricultural transformation in Africa, Mr. Yeboah Edmond?
So thank you very much. And I would like to start by greeting our lovely viewers. And the question you asked, why agriculture should be transformed, or why is this question relevant? First and foremost, agriculture is the backbone of every society, and it's the oldest occupation that we have till now. And one of the things that we need most in our life is food, undoubtedly. So nobody can survive without food, and that's why we need to talk about agriculture, because the manufacturing sector, the industrial sector, the service sector, they owe a lot to agriculture. And why do we need to talk about transformation at this point in time with respect to Africa? The first reason I would talk about is bundled under what I call threats, because currently we are facing threat, or potentially we will be facing threat as a continent. Why am I saying this? The population growth in Africa is unprecedented. We don't find it in anywhere in the world. We grow at a rate of 2.7%. If you want to put this into number or into perspective, currently Africa has about 1.2 billion people on the continent, and 2.7% means every year we add 32.8 million stomachs to be fed. And if you take Ghana, for example, Ghana is growing at a rate of 2.2%. When I was 20 years old, which is a decade ago, we were around 19 million. Here we are 31 million. So just do the math and do the calculation that the next 10 years, we will add 10 million to our population. How do you feed that much people if you don't think you need to transform agriculture? And recently, there was a committee set up by the African Union, and their goal is, if we look at the numbers, the rate at which our population is increasing and growing, there is a need to double food production. Sadly, as we talk right now, there are only 17 countries which we would say on the continent are making moves. I'm not saying they are there, they are making moves to make this a realization. What happens to the rest? So it looks like the continent has a problem, an impending problem, but we are not prepared for it. And that's the purpose of our talk today, to let us understand that we need to transform it so badly, because potentially we will run into problem. That's the first thing. The second thing is insecurity. So there is massive food insecurity on the continent. And how do we solve it, or how are we solving it now? We are solving it now by relying on imports. In 2018, we imported 40 million tons of cereals into the continent. Now, just ask yourself, or let's imagine this scenario that we had with the coronavirus, when all borders were closed, when global trade flow were disrupted. If this had happened for a longer time, what would have been your biggest worry? Food. If you don't produce your own food and you rely so much on other people to feed you, in such a scenario, the first thing we think about is, how do we feed ourselves? And this insecurity also reflects in food supplies. So today we have it, tomorrow we don't have it because we don't produce it, or we don't have a way to deal with it. Unstable food prices. Today it's 4 cities, tomorrow it's 5 cities, and it's shooting the economy in different ways. That so much high inflation on the continent just because you don't control it. It depends on the price that you get on the market. And then another factor you also want to look at is that even the food that we bring on board, it's unwholesome due to the long haul of transportation, storage, and handling. So just for the stats, 239 million Africans are classified undernourished. And if you put this in perspective, this is 1 out of 5. And we know that undernourishment or malnutrition has effect on adult productivity or productivity in general. Can we say that explains the reason why our productivity compared to other places is so low? Of course, yes. And if we don't solve this problem, could that perpetuate into the future? Yes, it can perpetuate into the future. And then the third thing I would want to talk about is climate change. That's a massive thing happening all over the continent or all over the world. And this is something that's really causing us scientists a lot of problems because expectedly the climate would change, or the changes have already begun. As far back as 1975, weather condition in Africa has changed dramatically. And think of it, 95% of farming in Africa is rain-fed. No technology. We don't use irrigation. So if you depend that much on the rain or on the elements, and these elements are changing, what is the future if you don't transform the way you do farming today? If you don't transform the agriculture and the way you handle this sector, how would you cope with it? And that's what we are saying. We need to talk about this. And a conversation I had with my mother-in-law, who is a cocoa farmer, she told me, Edmond, farming is no more attractive. And I was asking her why. And she's saying, when we need rain, we pray that the rain comes, and when the rain comes, it comes in abundance. When we need the sun, we pray that the sun comes, and when the sun comes, it comes in abundance, and the young cocoa pod starts to ripe. We are facing it. They are facing it on daily basis. So why don't we look at this? And that's one of the calls for transformation. So if we put all this together, then apparently if we don't act now, then agricultural sector is going to shrink and shrink further. And if it shrinks further, we are in trouble because on the continent, 65% of the labor force on the continent is in the agricultural sector. Can you imagine the catastrophe if it shrinks further? Then definitely we are talking about massive unemployment. And you also have to understand that 32% of the overall GDP of the continent is driven by agriculture. So this is no less of an issue. Because it means if you don't look at this issue, and if you don't transform the way the sector is being operated, then as BBC report questioned it, are we sleepwalking into a potential danger? Which could probably be so. But the other side is what I want to talk about, which is the potentials, right? So in the face of the threat, there are also potentials that calls for transformation. It's not just the threat. And one of such potential is that 60% of the world's uncultivated arable lands can be found in Africa. Okay. We hold the major or the most uncultivated arable lands in the world. So why not transform? We have the capacity, so why not do it? That's the question. And also, there are budding technologies that can help us mitigate the problem. So I would say, yes, there are threats and problems impending in the future. However, the continent has the potential, and that's why we are having this conversation that if we have that much potential, then why not transform the agricultural sector? So that would be my response, why we need to transform the agricultural sector in Africa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Edmond Yeboah, or Mr. Yeboah Edmond. But a quick follow-up. I mean, when you talked about the fact, I mean, this is true that indeed there is potential for our population to increase drastically, and so it means we would have to double our food production. But what do you also say to people who believe that we necessarily do not need to double our food production, because the problem is not really about production, but it's about distribution. I know in your submission, you did mention that the coronavirus, for example, has disrupted the global trade. So what do you say to people like that who believe that it's not about food production, it's not about doubling food production, as you seem to suggest, but perhaps we should work on our trade routes, you know? And so even if coronavirus is a problem and it has disrupted global trade, the focus should be on trade and not necessarily food production. What do you say to that in a minute or two?
So I think it's an age-old argument. Should I produce or should I leave the other person to produce? And it's a question of it depends, right? My personal opinion would be not to leave such a vital commodity in the hands of other people. I know there is a competitive advantage theory that says if that person produce more than you, let that person produce and you produce something that you can do best, but not in this situation, right? Because this is a threat. It's a security threat. Can you imagine? Who controls your stomach controls you, literally. So ask yourself, no country in the world with the capacity, so that it depends that I said in here, depends on your capacity. No country in the world with the capacity to produce would want not to produce, but rather depend on other people. And if we have 60% of the uncultivated arable lands in the world, why should we then take from other people and think about distribution? Why not produce well and redistribute, and you become the distributor? Because we have the capacity.
Absolutely. It makes sense. Thank you very much for that. And so I come to you with a different question, Kwabnakra. And I mean, it's very clear. Edmond has done a fantastic job telling us why we need an agricultural transformation in Africa. And I particularly like the answer he gave for the follow-up, the fact that we do have the capacity, you know, even if you talk about comparative advantage and those theories that seem to support trade in that manner. We are not saying trade is bad though. But the question I ask you is, do you think that still Africa's rural economic, you know, prosperity still rests on agriculture? I mean, with his submission also saying that about 65% of people in Africa are in the agricultural sector. And from the background, we saw that more than 80% also live in the rural areas. So do you think that the economic prosperity of the rural economies rest on agriculture? And why do you think so?
All right, great once again for having me. It's a pleasure to contribute on this platform. And thanks for the job that you guys are doing. It's been amazing. I follow up and it's been great. So as an applied economist by training, you know, you always say, oh, it depends. And Edward Dibin mentioned that in his submission. Obviously, I would say yes, we still need agriculture for rural, you know, development. We cannot do away with agriculture in the rural economy. It's really, really important. Take even the age statistics as an example. You go to Nigeria, for instance, the median age of Nigeria is like 17.9 years. If you take Ghana, median age is like 21.5 years. But then if you go to the advanced countries like the US, you go to Canada, US is like 38 point something years. Canada is over 40 years. UK, 40 and above years. So it means that if you look at Africa, we have a huge proportion or huge share of our population in a young age, right? So if these people are actually growing up, which sector has the chance to actually absorb these people? Is agricultural platform that, you know, avails itself. Remember in your introduction, you said already like 80% of the people living in the rural communities are into agriculture, right? But the obvious question that comes up is, then why then do we even think about agri as the sector that will get people out of poverty? It's because of how we think about it. The focus is on production, right? And that's the problem. If you produce without thinking about how, where the end product finds itself, then it becomes a problem. So if we have opportunity at the end of the day. If I'm going to produce, I know that the end product rests on this table, then for sure, I am confident that I could go into production. That will even make agric more lucrative for the youth, the teeming youth that is coming up, right? We have huge surge in unemployment numbers in Africa, but agric is a vibrant sector that would be able to, absorb them. And when we are thinking about this, I believe that we shouldn't just think about it from production standpoint, right? It's good to produce, but we should think about the marketing channels. We could actually take a lot of people, that huge population that is into the production side. We can put them on the marketing chain, and that will create a room for them to also survive. And when you do that, it will make it very lucrative, and young people would want to engage themselves in agriculture. So I say yes, agric is something that we can't do away with when we are thinking about rural economy.
Well, thank you very much, Kra. It might not necessarily be a follow-up per se, but
yeah.
I mean, Edmond mentioned some of the opportunities that we have, which you also, in a way, have added to it. He talked about the vast arable land that we have, and also the fact that the youthful population, which you also talked about. But you brought in a dimension, and the question I ask is, the marketing aspect that you talk about, is this something that is a threat, or you think it's an opportunity for us? I mean, in the African sense, is it something that we've been able to develop it very well over the years, and so we should be talking about agricultural transformation, or it's something that we have failed, and so we should not talk about agricultural transformation?
Great follow-up. I think we failed in that perspective, right? If you look at Ghana, for instance, we jumped from agric being the backbone, of our economy. Its contribution to GDP was tremendous. But then we moved from agric, instead of going into the industrialization phase where, manufacturing sector was supposed to become vibrant, we moved from agric to service. That was a huge jump. So because of that, it created that vacuum. Because we didn't pass through well through the industrialization phase, we never, built our roads. We didn't do proper job at road construction, putting up the infrastructure, the necessary infrastructure to, entice people to take marketing of agricultural produce as, something that is, a lucrative business for people to do. So I think we failed. We failed there. It's not something that is already there that we are not even utilizing. It is, of course, we've made some, progress in that sense, but I think it's not enough. It's something that we should look at, and something that we should put more emphasis on by developing our infrastructure. And when the infrastructure is in place, people would want to do that. People would want to, go. Because if I'm going to buy corn, I should say maize. If I'm going to buy maize from my village, and I know that the road is not going to be a problem. I know the buyers are in Kumasi or buyers are in Accra, but road from my village to Accra or to Kumasi is not a problem. That shouldn't be something that I would be thinking about, but rather will focus my mindset on how much I could actually purchase, right? And take to the distributors. But if you have to think about, the road is terrible, how do I get my final produce to the produce that I'm going to purchase to the market? It becomes a problem, and that is what I believe is moving. It's not making agric, attractive for the youth to even venture into. Because if the infrastructure is developed, we have proper insurance or risk management tools in place, it would entice people to get into it.
Thank you very much. And I mean, I can see that we already venturing into the second round, but when we come to the second round, I'll definitely ask you specifics, regarding what actions can be taken to address this problem. And so, Haruna, maybe a minute or two to say something about what Edmond said, in terms of the opportunities and threats that confronts us, and the reason why we need an agricultural transformation. But your question is the same as I posed to Kwabena. Do you think that Africa's rural economic prosperity still rests on agriculture, and why so?
Thank you, Evans. And I must say, Edmond and Kwabena started on a good trend. Even as agriculture has evolved over the years, when we talk about the early domestication period, where mainly agriculture was subsistence, to the popular green revolution that we all know about, to the mechanization era, then now to the current climate smart and precision agriculture period, we can clearly see that these transformations are still lacking in Africa, especially with the green revolution. The green revolution started some centuries ago. People all over the world have come to a stage of GMO production. Africa is still debating whether they should accept GMO or not. Even when you look at the African Center for Economic Transformation, they defined agriculture transformation as a process that leads to higher productivity on farms and strengthen the link between farming and other sectors of the economy. So they are trying to draw a link between agriculture and the economy to see how agriculture can transform a lot in the economy. For the purpose of today's presentation or discussion, I will argue in favor of rural agriculture development as one of the key indicators or factors or areas that we should focus on in order to transform Africa's agriculture sector. Evans, when we talk about agriculture rural development, what do we mean? What is the overall goal? The overall goal is using agriculture as a catalyst to improve the rural population quality of life. And as Kobna and Edmond started with the threats and opportunities, all that we are doing is to better the population quality of life, the quality of food, the safety, the quantity in the economy, in the environment. If you look at microeconomics point of view, where Edmond and Kobna will have a great idea on, some argue that with economic stability through agriculture, this can be achieved through actions within the rural areas. When you look at Africa's economy, though we have the urban centers, but people even migrate from rural area to the urban centers. Our agriculture effectiveness in the rural area is tremendous. When we focus on that area, perhaps when we work on the fundamentals, it may improve the micro level economics. Thus, it is important for me to stress that the efficiency of resources that are in Africa, that we have to harness, is very important in this rural development process. Evans, there is a concept called peak phosphorus, and those in soil science and fertilizer use efficiency will be familiar with this concept. When you look at the concept of peak phosphorus, globally they are estimating that by 2030, the maximum production of phosphorus as a rock in fertilizer manufacturing will be achieved. So there will be a decline, which by 100 years, they are estimating that this important mineral, phosphorus, is likely to be extinct or to be very limited. Africa, in Morocco, we have about 72% of phosphorus deposits. So it is a huge potential for us to start harnessing before this concept materializes. If you ask me whether the prospect of Africa's economy still lies on agriculture, I'll answer it with a two-sword answer, with a caution. When you look at the political cliche, we say agriculture is the backbone. Yes, I'll accept that, yes, with the political cliche and theory, agriculture can be seen as the backbone. But practically, on the ground, Ed Kobna enumerated very good points that we've moved from agriculture as the backbone to service and industry. And if you survey the World Bank report, you can see that globally, on average, Africa's economic indicators, we have service and industry being the top two contributor to the GDP growth. When you look at even the industry, they are focusing on mining, oil, and other mineral deposits. Agriculture is the third. So for you to tell me that agriculture is the backbone of Africa's economy is just a cliche, and in practical sense, that's not what we are seeing now. But we can harness it. How do we harness it? Let's set some objectives or some targets as developing the rural agriculture level, what we want to achieve, and then we see the end results. So I'll give these 4 objectives, then we look at what happens in the next round. So first, we must look at supporting farmers to produce sufficient quantities of safe food, not just food, but safe food. If you produce food that are not safe, then you are at the end trying to destroy the quality of life of your population. Again, we must provide farm businesses with support system that will help stabilize their incomes in the face of less predictable production conditions. So we can talk about contingency funding of agriculture. We've seen what COVID is doing. what are we doing to our agriculture people, the farmers? Is there any allocation of fund for them? If yes, how much across the continent? We must facilitate investment in food processing. It's very important. When we produce, we just send the raw materials. Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana produce like the most in terms of quantity of cocoa in the global market. But what processing technique do we have? Other European countries where they don't even produce cocoa, they have cocoa museums. They have chocolate museums where they organize seminars, they organize trade fairs to show how they are improving their cocoa processing sector, not even the production. When you go to Switzerland, there is one. When you go to Cologne in Germany, there is one. Even in Belgium, there is one. And in Budapest, where I stay here in Hungary, they have, but they don't produce cocoa. So we should look at how we can facilitate the food processing chain of agriculture. And lastly, we should maintain a viable rural community with diverse economic creation. So when we have a rural population, we shouldn't just be throwing social amenities to them, thinking that we are doing them a favor. We should equip them such that in 10 years, in 20 years to come, 15 years to come, they will be able to grow out of that rural status. Rural community status is not stagnant. People grow from rural communities to urban or maybe peri-urban. So we can look at it at this way. For now, this is what I will have to say. If you have any follow-up, I'll be ready to respond.
I thank you very much, Haruna, for that wonderful submission. But just a quick one also, I mean, you talked more, I mean, part of the challenges or the threats, we all agree that indeed Africa's rural economy, you know, still rests on the development of the agricultural sector. And you talked about some threats, which included mainly technology, in my view, because you said the Green Revolution bypassed Africa if you compare to the Asian region. And you even also brought in the GMO thing, which probably would not go into it too much. Maybe it's a debate for another day. But if I put everything together, I get the impression that you feel that part of the challenges is the fact that technological innovation has not seen the light of the day. I mean, the African farmer is not able to adopt technologically. Why do you say that? Why do you come to this conclusion? Because we see that the people are also doing well, you know.
Yes, so if you look at my argument, I started saying I will argue in favor of rural agriculture development. Then I broadly look at what is happening in the continent. Then I narrowed into how we should improve the rural development. It's true that technology is driving agriculture. When I talk about the Industrial Revolution, the Industrial Revolution mainly was not even on technology or, if you like, a very intense technology. It was a breeding period where we saw massive introduction of different breeds of, or different seed production of wheat, of corn, and it started in the Netherlands. We've seen in Ghana the transformation from breeding purposes of Abrotia to Abeleye to Tamale Yellow, those type of corns. Yes, we should be reviewing the production capacity of this as at now. Now we are not more even in the Green Revolution, but in Africa it is still there. So when you say technology, I agree that climate smart agriculture or precision agriculture is still a challenge in the agriculture sector. Others are doing it, but at what level? Only few people trying to improve the use of even drones to survey agriculture plots. When we go into details, you may look, and the last question, where I'll be giving my concluding remarks, you will know why I think that climate smart or precision nutrition should be included. But for now, on this basis, I stop at the rural development level.
Thank you very much. I give you a minute or two, Edmond, to react to some of the submissions that have been made by Kwabena and Haruna. Largely, they all basically agree with you when some of the opportunities and threats that you give. But if you would want to react to them specifically, they brought in marketing, the side of Kwabena, and also technology with Haruna.
So I agree with both of them, but I diverge a little bit because when we say rural development rests on transformation of agriculture, I say yes, it does, and we should go for it. But see, we have to identify the biggest problem, that if you have a continent that 65% of people are directly involved in agriculture, then it's a problem. Why am I saying it's a problem? Ask yourself, is it meaningful employment? No. It's your grandmother, it's your grandfather, it's your cousin in the village using hoe and cutlass, and we still classify that as part of the labor force. And that's the reason why we are so poor. Because if 65% of your population are using hoe and cutlasses to harvest one basket of cassava, and we still capture them in statistical data as being part of the labor force, that's where the problem is. So we need to adapt technology, as he said, but the focus is to shift people from the production side, as Kabna said. So you want to revolutionize it, and if you want to revolutionize it, just like in developed countries, you have a small section of their population involved in agriculture, but they produce and produce in surpluses because they've embraced technology. So it's going to cause disruption in the sense that you are going to take people out of the direct production, but you would eventually put them somewhere along the value chain, either in manufacturing, in marketing, in processing, right? You will put them somewhere, and that's the transformation we need. So that 65% is problematic, and we need to start looking at it from that angle, that if you have that much people doing hand-to-mouth sort of back-breaking activities to produce one basket of cassava and one sack of maize, then there's a problem. You have people moving around, but that's not efficient. So from an efficiency point of view, let's drive that number down drastically, and that will call for technology.
Yeah. And I'm sure when we thank you very much, and I like your last sentence, which is we need to, we need to have a change in order to be able to transform this sector. If you are joining us, we are live, we're streaming live on Facebook at Sepsa Africa and also on AK Mensah's War. Today we are discussing the topic, transforming the agricultural sector in Africa. And my guests have been Haruna Gado Yakubu, Kwabnakra, and Edmond Yeboah. I also would love to mention at this point that as we are about to begin the second round, where we look at the various actions that we need to take to be able to transform the sector, we would hear from Moses Malaga, who is the CEO of Agro Innova. That's a local startup and agro-tech company. They recently won an award at the Agro Tech Company Annual Award. So we'll hear from him, and he would tell us more about what he does. And I already like the perspective that my panelists have here. Everyone is calling for a technological revolution as part of the ways to see the transformation of the agricultural sector.